Hello folks, this is Stephen J9414 here, and welcome to another video. Pops out. So, this here is a K-frame Smith and Wesson Model 10, actually it's a pre-Model 10 from 1949. It is an M&P 38, not a victory model, and this right here is a E-frame Colt Official Police. So both these firearms have been safety checked, and there are no rounds in any of the chambers in these cylinders. These both hold 6 chambers in both revolvers. I do have some these are spent casings to use in case I want to show how it fires, because those are obviously spent and then not go boom. And I'm to shoot by snap caps, and they work in place of snap caps. Anywho, here, I just wanted to start, maybe do a little bit of a new video series here about classic pistols, in particular old cop revolvers and other police revolvers, police guns too, such as early Smith and Wesson semi-autos and stuff like that. But for the purpose of this video, I will be showcasing my K-frame M&P 38 made in 1949 and this 1929 Colt Official Police. Both these were some of the most popular revolvers that were made and used from about 1900 until 1969, 1970 or so. The K-frame M&P 38 went on, became the Model 10. It was still used up through 1980s by Smith and Wesson. Colt stopped making the E-frame in 1969. However, the legacy of the E-frame lived on in the I-frame, which was the original 357 Magnum, the later Trooper 357 Magnum, not the Mark III Trooper, and of course the very popular and much sought after first gen Python. The I-frame was beefed up from the E-frame and can handle pressure 357 Magnum, so the Colt Official Polices were built in 357 Magnum as prototypes only, and the frames were not strong enough. But that is for a whole other discussion here, and what I'm going to talk about is these two particular pieces. So, I like both, and as with any used firearm, you should understand how they operate and how to fix them. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, consult a professional gunsmith. If you're willing to try things on your own and have some basic tool experience, I highly recommend this series of books by Jerry Kuhnhausen. He was a professional gunsmith, and he wrote these repair manuals for the Smith and Wesson revolver, and this is volume 1 of the Colt double action revolvers, and they cover things like basic repairs here, as you see here, the Smith and Wesson. This is a later one because it has coil spring. The earlier ones had leaf springs like shows here. And same thing here in the one for Colt. This one here is showing about how to fit a cylinder. It goes through everything here from failures, why the failures happen. Like this case, one decided to load plus P plus round and blow up top strap and firearm. Don't do that ever. Always use ammo with a spec, especially if you're using reloads. Be very careful. And this is how to fit a hand to a cylinder. Sorry, not a hand, a bolt to a cylinder, which I actually did on a Colt revolver. But very, very useful. Especially, Colts require a lot of hand fitting, and I'll get to that in a moment. So, anywho, back to these handguns. So, I really like both, and both of these are particularly popular, and I wanted to educate people also about these because there's a lot of misconceptions out there that there's people that think that if you fire a Colt revolver from this era of the bank vault V-spring era type lockwork, that it'll just magically go out of time, that they're unreliable, and not the majority, but there is a small vocal minority that think this. There is a hair amount of truth to that, but it's nowhere near as bad as you would think. Now, if you're shooting 357 Magnum on the I-frame, which was a strengthened version of this, or very hot 38 special loads, you will wear down the hand faster. So here's the thing you need to understand. Let's take Smith and Wesson, for example, for comparison, because most revolver manufacturers use a copy of the Smith and Wesson Action, with some exceptions, of course. And most of them rotate counterclockwise, like Smith and Wesson, whereas Colt is clockwise. But I'll get to that in a minute. So, the Smith and Wesson Action locks here, and on these bolt recesses here, and then there's a divot also on the back of the ratchet that locks into the back here, and then when you push the cylinder release forward, that pushes that little steel piece in the middle there that rides in this ejector rod housing, and it allows it to disconnect. Whereas Colt is totally different. As you notice here, there is no front lockup on a Colt, but it still has 3 points of lockup. Thankfully, it can do that one-handed. Can't say that at Smith & Wesson, because it pulls back and it's less force to pull it back than it is. You'd think the push forward would be easier, but you're pushing against a lot more spring pressure in the Smith & Wesson when trying to do cylinder release. Anywho, so it locks on these little recesses here on the bolt stop, and that's the bolt popping out here, and that's the piston here is connected to the cylinder release, the clamshell, and that's what locks into the back of the ratchet there. And the other point that locks up on is the hand. And if you notice here, the hand has 2 fingers, and it's unloaded, so it's not going to fire anything in. It's open. So anyhow, the hand has 2 fingers, and the bottom hand interfaces with the ratchets on the back of the extractor, and that is the 3rd point of lockup. And that's why Colts wear a little bit faster, because the hand and the ratchet are involved in lockup. So your hand, and well, not as much ratchet. The ratchet is a wear item too, but the hand is definitely a wear item. And this is where you have to decide which you prefer. Getting back on topic here. So the Colt uses a V-spring and a rebound lever, and that does pretty much everything. It is a very simple action. And it's all inside the side plate here. So on this side is on Smith & Wesson, because Smith & Wesson rotates the wrong way, counterclockwise. I'm just kidding. Smith & Wesson's awesome. That's how most revolvers are. Now, with the exception of the 1899 Army, the Colt revolvers have rotated clockwise. The 1899 that was involved in the Philippines and 38 long Colt rotated counterclockwise, and it wasn't reliable, and it had a lot of issues. Turning clockwise is stronger, but Colt also doesn't have the forward lockup on, as far as I know, any of the revolvers, unlike Smith & Wesson. So on Smith & Wesson, which rotates clockwise, counterclockwise, and oh, the cylinder wasn't completely closed. Is support that because it rotates counterclockwise, it has the front lockup. Colt doesn't need that as much because it rotates clockwise. So the Smith & Wesson has a spring for everything. So if you are repairing it and the side plate is on the left-hand side, there's a spring for the hand in order to provide tension for the hand. There's a spring for the trigger return. There's a spring for the hammer. 1911 is an excellent firearm, but the originals were, they have a lot of safeties, grip safety and the little thumb safety, but if you drop it, it may go off. These are completely drop safe. They have hammer blocks inside both of them. Smith & Wesson had a rebounding hammer. Initially had just a spring for the hammer block, and it was an issue when they had used these in World War II for lower echelon troops that were not likely to be involved in combat. A couple of them dropped the firearm on the hammer by accident and actually discharged. So after World War, I don't know if it was during World War II, after World War II, they added a physical hammer block. Colt beat them because in the early 1900s, they thought of having a hammer block in here. And what that does is when the trigger is relaxed and is not being depressed and the hammer is at rest, that creates a physical metal block that prevents accidental discharges. So I'm going to go and start here with the Colt Official Police, and I went ahead and took the side plate off just to show you what I mean by the V-spring and rebound lever. So I'm going to use the flathead I have here. So this is the hand and hammer, That's the piston that controls the cylinder release here, and that's the trigger. And all this is sprung by the V-spring and the rebound lever. I don't know if I'm able to show you. Very simple. Now, this doesn't apply to the J-frame. J-frame's all coil springs, so those are the Mark III, Mark V actions, which went on until the early 2000s when Colt decided to stop making double action revolvers, and the newer CZ-owned Colts use a combination of the Mark III, Mark V action, but they put the V-spring back in, but without the rebound lever. That's a whole other topic. I like the new CZ Colts, but unfortunately, as of the time of this video, I don't think you can buy parts for them. Now, they are completely warranted by Colt, but that means that you're going to have to send it back to them if there's any problems, which for most people is fine, but I like being able to stock up in parts. And the pre-Colt revolvers you can easily get parts for from the companies that I mentioned but previously in the video. Whereas these Colt, you're sending it back to Colt for the new CZ-owned Colts. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that you can't get parts for them on places like Numeric and Brownells and Jack First and not talking about grits. I'm talking about like springs and things like that, hammers, so forth. You can't for older ones, you can't for new ones, but Colt warranties and sends it back to Colt. Anywho, this is a much simpler action than Smith and Wesson, but especially the rebound lever and the hand. If you ever have to replace them, make sure you have this book, because you have to handle it very, very, very carefully. On the back side of the rebound lever is a little triangle, and that's what controls the bolt timing. And you had to file it just right. If it's filed too much, then it no longer can move the bolt. If it has too much, then the bolt stays open too long and won't close until after the hammer is released. So it's a lot of reading and seeing other people doing it and do it yourself before you learn. You can buy the rebound levers used. Now, used hands I would stay away from. Same with the rebound lever, but I bought rebound levers, using them pretty good. But the hands, I definitely recommend the Jack First hands, which this is right here. This is fitted to this firearm because they're taller. And as they're explaining, it has two fingers, the bottom finger and the top finger. The top finger does the initial movement of the cylinder with the pads on the ratchet, and the bottom one is what locks it up. So a nice thing about Colt is, even if the bottom finger on these bank vault locks is a little bit low, and when you cock the hammer back, it's supposed to lock into these recesses. When you pull the trigger to the firing position all the way back, the hand lifts just a little bit more in order to ensure that the cylinder is locked into the bolt notch, so that way the chamber is properly lined with the forcing cone. Okay, so I have to hold and apply pressure here. This is what I mean here by the hand. So that is what locks in here, and this is the lock into the bolt notch on the bottom. I'm going to let it drop down carefully. But that locks into that recess. So, with that said, on to Smith and Wesson. Now, on to the K-frame Smith and Wesson. Now, these grips aren't the ones that came with it. Those are copies made, I forget where, Taiwan, right? I think that's where they were, Taiwan or Thailand or something. Those are replica grips from the original 30 hand ejector. The ones that came with this gun was the Magna grips, because this gun's from 1949. And this is an M&P 38. Now, I just want to restate again. I think I mentioned it, but the cylinder is not original to this firearm. That is a later model, Model 10. And it was actually very easy to fit. And this is what I need to get to in this particular segment, because Smith & Wesson, the internals are much, many more parts to do the same that compared to the Colt pre-1969 and older, which basically has rebound lever and hammer spring do everything. it's not true of Smith and Wesson. So the Colt action is simpler, but requires a lot of hand fitting. The Smith and Wesson is the exact opposite. The action is a lot more complicated, but requires minimal hand fitting, which is why, in my opinion, the Smith & Wesson revolvers remain in continuous production much longer than Colt. As nothing, their Colt firearms are great, but this requires a lot less man hours, not only for manufacturing, but repairing, because of the less hand fitting required. So the hand and the handspring, the hammer spring is just a hammer spring. This right here, I believe that's the trigger return spring, correct me if I'm wrong. And somewhere in here's the bolt, and that is part of the latch. So this part here that you see that is floating around right here, that kind of got away from me a little bit. This is the hammer block, and I think I mentioned this about they didn't originally have that. So Smith & Wesson added this because Colt had this since the early 1900s, and they thought their revolvers were drop safe, and they weren't. Because, as we have mentioned earlier in the video, when the Victory models were used and they were in the Navy, there were a couple of people that dropped the hammer on the ground and actually discharged. This prevents accident discharge, and the way it works is different. On Colt, the right is behind the hammer, which makes it much simpler when you assembling and reassembling, where this was an afterthought and they just modified the side plate. That's where the hammer block rides in. So you have to be very careful about that when you're reassembling. It does the same thing, it's just this was an afterthought where Colt actually took the time to put the hammer block in the Colt Police Positive and the new Army Special back in the early 1900s, just before World War I. So Smith & Wesson in that regard is a little late to the game, which is why part of the reason why I think Colt had the police market for revolvers. But after World War II, when they moved to double action shootings versus slow single action firing, which is the police doctrine, Smith & Wesson eventually took over, not only because they were less expensive, required less man hours, manufacture and repair, but also they're a little easier to shoot double action than Colts, which is why Smith & Wesson took over the police market for revolvers, and they're both good guns for different reasons. So when you pull the trigger, oh God, help me. Jesus. And that's basically how it functions. That moves the hand, everything. There's an individual spring for everything. One more thing I forgot to mention. This is not the original hammer it came with. The firearm. Now, it came with this particular firearm when I bought it used. I think that the original M&P 38 hammer has a very narrow back of the hammer, where I think this came from the target model, being model 14 or 15, someone put on at a later date. I like a little bit more, but it's more for target, for cocking a single action more easily. The original hammer had a very narrow spur, which was more service grade. But anyhow, this house assembled, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'll try to either include in this video or hopefully another video in the future of what it's like to shoot these guns. Revolvers are still quite capable for self-defense. Just for me, is the maximum you do where legal for concealed carry. It is where you live and may not be where you live.